Hi, my name is Lynn Bongiovanni, and I am researching and presenting on fostering peer play and friendships, creating a culture of inclusion. This is for my Kin 587 class this summer 2017. Before I begin my presentation, I want each viewer to reflect on these questions. Why do students with autism have difficulty playing with their peers and developing friendships? What interventions do I know of already to help address the deficit individuals with ASD typically exhibit related to social and play situations? And if you are working in the field with ASD, what interventions have you used to address social and play situations? Did the intervention you used previously help to grow the social and play skills of the individuals you were working with? I hope through my presentation you're able to reflect on these questions and find answers. In order to play with other individuals, it is dependent on these skills. You need to be able to socialize, have cognitive skills, and express communicative skills. But with children with autism, they typically can have difficulties interacting with others. Some reasons they have difficulty interacting with others is delays or difficulties with communication skills. They also have issues with initiating appropriate speech or generalizing spontaneous speech to various people in different places or using different stimuli. Individuals with autism also have difficulty participating in appropriate social behaviors and in social competence. That means relating with their peers. You may be questioning why it is important to teach social and play interactions, or you may be questioned by your supervisors or by parents why they should be having their children participate in these therapies or interventions. I know I went to the autism conference up at Patton, and I was really excited to go to the different sessions that they had on these topics and start implementing them in my classroom. And I got questioned by my supervisor, why are you doing this? You need to be teaching academics. And I had all the research to back up through the autism conference that social skills is a very important skill that these students need to learn, and it will help us with the problem behaviors that we see and being able to implement and integrate these students more into the general education setting, and also just having them be able to relate better to their peers, with their family members. A lot of times it's hard for individuals with autism to engage in social and play situations with their peers. So by doing different interventions and finding an intervention that works with your students can definitely help them in the long run in developing these skills. If students don't have the skills to engage with their peers, they may withdraw or not engage with their peers whatsoever. They may demonstrate problem behaviors as well. And there's many different types of interventions. And through my presentation, I'm going to be sharing a few different ones, but I encourage you to look at the research. I will provide different citations and the references at the end, and also to try and implement them with your students. And if these interventions do not work, continue to research on your own and find interventions that will work with your students, because it is very important to be teaching our students how to interact with their peers and the people around them. The first intervention that I'm going to discuss is called time delay procedures. And you may be familiar with this. There's a large amount of research on time delay being used in different interventions like teaching language acquisition, socially appropriate use of language, discrete behaviors, and chain behaviors. So what is time delay? It's providing a model or a phrase, word, etc., and then the individual that you're working with repeating it with a small time delay, which can be used within 2 seconds, 3 seconds, up to 10 seconds. In various different studies that they used, it ranged in amount of time. But if the student uses the model that was prompted, and then they're able to gain access to the item, to the person, the activity, whatever was desired. with them. With modeling the appropriate phrase, it limits the error that could be used by the individual. So when they're provided with a prompt, they're able to mimic it. So they need to be able to have echoic skills of repeating what is said. And what's great about the time delay is it can be used in the natural the natural context. The time delay procedures when using with the social and play skills can be used right in the home and in the classroom environment, which will help the child be able to generalize across the settings that they're typically in with people that they're usually with and the stimuli that they're used to. And also being able to use it in the natural environment, it can be generalized by the students sometimes. In the study that we're going to look at, 2 of the participants were able to generalize the skills that they learned in one setting and then take it to different settings and using it with different people and with different items as well. But really the success is dependent on the child's interest in the stimuli and how powerful reinforcement that can also be paired. So natural reinforcement is great to be using because not all the time that they're going to be able to receive a tangible additional reinforcement as well. Based on the article by Lieber, Frey, and Simon, in their study there were 3 boys with autism who participated, and the sessions in the study were used during their daily playtime sessions that the boys were accustomed to in their typical routine at school. The boys ranged in ages 5 to 9 years old, and they exhibited deficits in social communication skills and play skills. Each participant was allowed to choose any peer in the classroom to play with during the sessions, but you should know each play pal also had a disability since they were from the same classroom. Each play session was completed in the play area of the classroom, which all the participants were familiar with. For the study, 2 activities were chosen for the participants to play with that the teachers or the study participants knew of, and they knew that the boys would be interested. The activities had multiple pieces and were high preferences of the participants. It was good to have multiple pieces in the activity so that they would have to share with their peers. Prior to the study, each participant was taught how to play with the toy using a task analysis, so they were able to practice the skills beforehand before a peer was presented so they would not become frustrated with the skills. The study provided specific criteria that was laid out to score the boys in social interaction and play skills for the participants that they needed to do in order to receive a point. So if the boys did something, they received a point. The criteria that the participants needed to do was use the peer's name when requesting items, turn their shoulders or face towards the peer, and make a statement, request, or ask a question of the peer. If the participant did not engage in this criteria or play with the toy correctly, the participant was provided a prompt, and then with the time delay, they would echo the prompt to the other peer pal. The study showed that the time delay was effective in increasing the social and play interactions with all 3 boys. The boys were also able to receive less modeling and able to demonstrate the skills more independently. So after the study, they continued to show skills of requesting and interacting with their peers and also with the toys and different toys as well. The next strategy I wanted to discuss was the use of visual strategies. You may be familiar with this and implemented in your classroom already in different formats. It is believed that visual information can be easier processed for individuals with autism compared to auditory information. So if information is presented with a symbol or a picture or a gesture, it might be easier for an individual with autism to understand and comprehend at a quicker rate than hearing information solely. So it may be more beneficial in your classroom to have different visual things. For example, visual information is used in many different interventions, like a schedule, a visual schedule to show your students what is coming up next, a visual organized task. So if your student has to complete a task, breaking it down with different pictures, or written or pictorial scripts, which will be used in this next intervention that I will be discussing, a rule reminder card, and a visual task analysis. So in this study, the purpose was to determine the impact of communication of visual strategies in a preschool social skills with their other typical peers. In this study by Gans and Flores, there was 3 boys with autism who all had verbal language. Each boy was 4 years old, and they participated in play groups. They intended to have more individuals with autism participate in the study, but they had difficulty finding individuals that could participate in the length of the study and the time frame that they were looking at. It was during the summertime, and they were having a hard time finding families that could commit with vacations and different things like that. Originally, they wanted to have 2 groups with 2 individuals with autism and 2 typical peers, but they weren't able to have as many participants. But they were still able to have individuals with autism and typically developing peers engage in the playgroups. The playgroups took place in extra classrooms in a school building and were decorated in different themes that the parents indicated that the children enjoyed. Some of them were ocean, farm, a birthday party theme, and a bakery theme. The researchers developed scripts related to the theme for the children to use that were printed with word and pictures to show the participants. Since the children were younger, they don't have the ability to read quite yet, so the pictures went along with the words to help the students see it. The script cards were placed in the play area near relevant items, and the adults also prompted them as well. So the purpose of using these verbal cue cards really was so that the students would engage in appropriate talking points with their typical peers. A lot of times it can be hard with students with autism to engage in conversation with other people, and especially on topic and relevant information. So with having the cue cards around, the students were able to read the cue cards or just become more familiar with words that would be more appropriate for them to use during it. From this article, we were able to determine that there was an increase of scripted phrases during the play sessions. So with having the scripted phrases around the play area and also having the adults cue the different scripted phrases cards, there was an increase of language by the participants. The participants had an overall increase in language that they exhibited during their play sessions with their typical peers, and it was considered effective for all 3 boys that were in the study. But however, it was only considered very effective for one of the 3 boys. Since there was such a limited amount of participants in this study, I believe there needs to be more studies on this topic to see if it does truly benefit overall for other students with autism. And also with this, all these students also had language. What would we do for students that didn't have language? How would they be able to communicate? Would they be able to use different communication devices and maybe use like peck symbols to indicate how to interact with their peers or different things like that? So I feel like they would need to continue to expand on this information and also look at different ways to communicate with their peers if there is no verbal language yet for these individuals. And also that this was also geared to a very young age setting. So how could we increase more appropriate language with older students and even high school or adult students on appropriate talking points with them? So this study does help bring more awareness to just having more on-target conversations when playing with other people, but there definitely needs to be an increase in the amount of information on this topic. The next intervention I'm going to discuss is about photographic activity schedule. A photographic activity schedule is just like a visual strategy that we were discussing in the in the past intervention. A photographic activity schedule uses pictures for an individual to use to complete a sequence of activities. So if you would use the example of brushing teeth, you would have like a picture of a toothbrush and then a picture of the toothpaste getting put on the toothbrush and then maybe a picture of your teeth and then brushing. So it shows the steps that you would take, and it's good for individuals that can't read yet to be able to just see the pictures of it. And usually there are some words that go along with it. But the use in this study was to use a photographic activity schedule for when children are playing on a playground. And so since children with autism typically do not independently gauge in appropriate behaviors during uninstructed periods of times, this would help an individual with autism know what activities are available for them to play with and just give them the reminder of what to do instead. For an example, we want our students to be playing on the swings, on the slide, and different things like that, but they may be engaging in more characteristics of autism, like a repetitive, like going up and down the steps repeatedly over and over, or even maybe inappropriate behaviors, like throwing wood chips or different things like that. So we want to make sure that our children are engaging in appropriate behaviors instead of negative behaviors, and also are exposing themselves to new activities and being able to interact with their peers. So an activity schedule would be great for at recess to just have your students be able to reference different things. In the study, there were 3 boys with autism who all ranged in ages of 4 or 5 years old. Each one of these boys had deficits related to outdoor playground skills. So they would either engage in stereotypical repetitive movements or not engage in activities or not complete in at least 5 playground activities during a 10-minute observation. Previous to this, the boys were able to follow a picture schedule with 4 to 5 steps with 80% or better accuracy. The studies took place in an outdoor play area with different structures for the participants to use and totaled 16 different activities. Before beginning baseline, the boys were taught picture location correspondence. So when shown the picture of a different activity, they were able to see the picture and then go straight to that location and then come back to the binder. So the instructor would show them the picture, say, go here, and they had to go straight to that location. The picture schedule was organized in a binder, and on the last page of the binder was an edible reinforcement for the participant when completing all the steps. So in the binder, each page was a different activity. And throughout the different sessions, the activities were shuffled around for the boys, so they weren't the exact same order. But on the last page, there was always an edible reinforcement for them to have when they completed everything. So each play session lasted for 10 minutes, and for the most part, the boys were independent. The only times that really anyone else engaged them adult-wise was if they were attempting to leave the playground area, or if they were trying to engage in problem behaviors. If it was a safe problem behavior, they were just ignored, but if it was a safety issue, the problem behavior would be blocked. So for each participant, they had to complete the following steps. They had to open the binder, point to the picture, go to the activity, complete the activity, return to the schedule, turn the page, and repeat all these steps until they went on to the last page where they were able to receive the edible and then close out the binder. So there was a lot of back and forth movements. And then also before this, the boys were trained in how to engage in the different activities. So they weren't just going to a swing set and standing there. They needed to know how to swing on the swings and be there for a little duration of time so that they were truly engaged in the different activities. So during the baseline time frame, all the participants were observed, and they either engaged in 0 activities or up to 4 different playground activities. All the participants also increased in the amount of activities during the 10-minute sessions they had and also the duration they had. So with having the activity schedule, they were going through and selecting and participating in different activities, and through the trainings that they had, they were able to perform and complete different activities for a duration. During the study, they removed the schedule for a duration of time to see if the boys would still complete in the different various activities. And without the activity schedule present, they went back to their baseline results. So we could see how important that it really is to have the visual schedule for them. When the activity schedule was back and reintroduced, the students engaged in more of the activities and participated in the activities for a longer duration. So the activity schedule really did show a benefit to these students and help them engage in a variety of different activities when they were at recess. Peer interactions are typically focused on at an early age. That's why I wanted to include this study, because all of the other studies that I used were all at a very early age, usually during the younger early intervention age or early kindergarten or so. But there's still a need for teaching social skills at an older age and creating friendships this way. Educators often struggle to build a relationship between peers with and without disabilities. Students with autism are being included more in general education setting, but just because they're within proximity of typical peers, it does not guarantee interactions are happening between the two groups. The best way to address this is through planned interventions. Planned interventions ensure that opportunities are being made. The study that we're going to look at is during lunchtime, and just like at recess, a lot of times when it's not a structured activity, students with autism have difficulty navigating what to do. Lunch can also be a very isolating setting for individuals with disabilities. Oftentimes they sit at a separate table with additional staff like special education teachers or personal care assistants, so it becomes very isolated for them. And there's not many studies that are looking at the non-instructional setting for building a social network for peers. And so it's very important that we are considering the different aspects of the daily routine for these students and just to help them engage socially. So although these aren't play skills that we're looking at to engage older kids, we do need to look at friendships at the older age as well. To briefly go over this article by Hoffman, Carter, Bodeman, Buttel, Harvey, and Gustafson, 4 students participated in this study who had autism. This is in a high school setting, so they're 15 to 17 years old. During baseline, the participants had 0% to 14% engagement with their typical peers in the cafeteria. So there were typical peers in the cafeteria, but they didn't engage. And this might be due to not being seated around their typical peers. It may be just a withdrawal mechanism they have, or they might be just being ignored by their typical peers. All participants engaged in a weekly peer network sessions during lunch with their typical peers. So before these sessions took place, typical peers and the teachers that were engaging in this study went through a training on how to interact with the students with autism and how to facilitate a session with them. And so the typical peers were provided with generic questions they could ask, how to keep the conversation going, and also how to prompt a response. So peer partners were initiating the conversation, prompting interactions, planning and participating in activities, and then modeling appropriate social skills. So the peer partners were really doing a lot of the work, and then the teachers were basically there to monitor at times, but they weren't always there, but also to provide feedback how to better interact with the students as well. All participants grew in their social engagement percentage greatly through these interventions. But however, after the intervention was in place, the typical peers did not tend to engage the participants during lunch anymore. So the typical peers went right back to eating with their friends. And so the students with autism were not being engaged. And this really is a barrier. So they're sitting with their typical peers for one session a week, and then they're not engaged anymore. So I think the structure of this program is really limited because it's basically pulling the typical peer out of their comfortable setting with all their friends and sitting with a student with a disability. What I really think should be happening is having the typical peer remain with their friends and then have the student with a disability join in so that they become a group member and it's not a chore to have the typical peer come out of their preferred environment. So I think there could be a lot that could change in this, but it's definitely a great step in the direction, and maybe starting the typical peer in the small group with the child with the disability, or the adult in this case, and then moving them into a larger group setting. Because what we really want to see is interactions between them, not just when it's a scheduled session. And we want to continue to see the growth and the interactions between these two populations. Another point that was brought up in this study was that none of the participants needed to receive social skills instruction. So it truly was the case that these students weren't being engaged because they were not with their typical peers. They were sitting at a different table. It wasn't the need of social skills training for them to be engaged. Once they were in the peer mediated groups, they were engaging with the typical peers. Also, all these peers that were in the groups had verbal skills. So I think there also needs to be research on how we can create friendships and social relationships between individuals with autism that don't have great verbal skills or don't have any verbal skills at all. So this is an area that we do need to continue to research and develop great friendships between both populations of individuals with autism and typical peers. To briefly review what we discussed in this presentation, we went over 4 different interventions that can help foster play skills and social skills and friendships with children with autism and individuals with autism. The different interventions that we discussed were time delay procedures, use of a visual strategy, a photographic activity schedule, and peer mediated groups. All of these interventions were found using scholarly-based articles. In the beginning of my presentation, I started with 3 different questions that I asked my viewers to think about during the presentation. Since we are done the presentation of the different articles, I wanted to bring these questions back up and be able to go through them and hopefully engage your interest in this topic. So one of the questions was, why do students with autism have difficulty playing with their peers and developing friendships? And we did discuss this in the different articles, and some of it was at the high school level, and it was due to isolation and their peers not wanting to sit with them at the lunch table. And we used peer mediated instruction groups for that. And in the lower levels, it might have been due to negative behaviors or not engaging correctly, like at recess time. So helping the students use the visual schedule to engage in different activities. Another thing I wanted to ask was, what interventions do you know of that you use, and so that we could spark on different topics. There was different topics that I learned along the way through this research. And if you are working in the field, what interventions are you using and what is successful? So I talked about a little bit about my different social groups that I have of interacting with the students and using time delay. And I think moving forward with this different research that we gathered through this presentation, I really want to look at the schedule that was used during recess time and helping my students know how to engage in unstructured activities. So using that recess time or the different independent play time and helping my students know how to navigate those times better and to really engage themselves and be able to engage with their peers as well. So I hope that you enjoyed this presentation and have different new ideas that you can implement with your class or your students. And if you have any questions, please let me know. And if you have any interventions that you feel that have worked, I would really like to hear them from you. Thank you. This last slide is just the articles that I used with the citations for any reference. And in each article, there's a list of different articles that were referenced and used. So it's a great resource to continue to research.